The rain fell in relentless sheets that night, a cold shroud of needles piercing the pavement outside the Grand Serenity Hotel. Each drop gleamed under the flicker of neon lights, casting fractured reflections like a shattered mirror of the world below. Into this tempest stepped Grace Monroe, a black woman cloaked in mystery as much as in the threadbare fabric of an old coat. Her shoes, patched and worn, slapped against the wet concrete with a rhythm that whispered of resilience, of battles fought in silence. Her face, half hidden beneath a hood, bore eyes that burned with a secret fire, a flame no storm could quench. She was no ordinary wanderer seeking shelter. She was a phantom of purpose, a riddle wrapped in rags, her presence an enigma poised to unravel the arrogance of those who ruled this gilded palace. Who was she? A lost soul adrift in the deluge, or a master playwright stepping onto the stage of fate, ready to wield her narrative like a blade? The rain knew her truth, drumming its cryptic song, but soon the light would rise, and with it, the curtain of revelation. Within the Grand Serenity, the air shimmered with opulence. Crystal chandeliers dangled like frozen constellations, casting their glow onto marble floors that gleamed with the polish of privilege. Marcus Reed, a white man of 28, stood behind the reception desk, his posture rigid with the confidence of a king in his court. His blonde hair slicked back with meticulous care, and his sharp green eyes spoke of a life untested by hardship, a life where power was inherited, not earned. To Marcus, the Grand Serenity was more than a hotel. It was a fortress of exclusivity, a sanctuary where only the worthy could tread. When Grace pushed through the glass doors, her coat dripping a trail of rainwater onto his pristine domain, he saw not a woman, but a trespasser, an unwelcome shadow staining the perfection he guarded. He spoke first, his voice a blade of ice slicing through the hum of the lobby. "You're in the wrong place." The words were clipped, laced with a disdain that needed no elaboration. Grace bowed her head, her hands clutching a tattered canvas bag, as if it were her last tether to dignity. "I just need a room for the night," she murmured, her voice trembling with a fragility that was, unbeknownst to him, a masterful performance. She fumbled in her bag, letting a few crumpled bills flutter to the floor, pennies and dollars scattered like fallen leaves. "I have money." Marcus's lips curled into a sneer, a sound escaping him that was half laugh, half scoff. "That won't buy you a napkin here, let alone a room. Leave before you waste any more of my time." Grace knelt to gather her coins, her movements slow and deliberate, a tableau of humility staged for an audience of one. Yet beneath the veil of submission, her eyes flickered with a resolve Marcus could not fathom, a spark of defiance that belied the rag she wore. He crossed his arms, his gaze dripping with contempt, seeing only her dark skin, her patched shoes, her sodden coat, markers he had long since cataloged as evidence of inferiority. To him, she was a stereotype made flesh, unworthy of the elegance that surrounded them. He did not hear the silent overture of fate, its strings tightening around his pride, nor did he sense the storm brewing beyond the rain, a storm that would soon thunder through his world. The downpour outside roared louder, and Grace's voice rose with it, threaded with a desperation so artfully crafted it could have moved stone. "Please, it's freezing out there. I have nowhere else to go. Just a corner, anything." But Marcus's heart was a fortress of its own, walled off by years of unexamined privilege. "Stop your theatrics," he snapped, striding from behind the desk with the aggression of a man defending his throne. "People like you, dirty, thieving, I've seen it all before. Get out now, or I'll have the police drag you away." Without awaiting her reply, he seized her arm, his grip a vice of entitlement, and shoved her toward the exit. The glass doors swung wide, and Grace stumbled, crashing onto the wet steps outside. Her bag spilled open, its meager contents tumbling into the rain. A handful of coins, a faded photograph of a black girl beaming beside her mother, and a broken silver bracelet that gleamed faintly under the streetlights. James, the hotel's black security guard, rushed forward, his broad frame bending to help her. But Marcus's voice cracked like a whip through the night. "James, don't touch her. Get back to your post." James hesitated, his eyes meeting Grace's in a fleeting exchange of sorrow and solidarity. "I'm sorry," he whispered, barely audible. Grace, drenched and kneeling in the puddle, replied softly, "Don't be. I got this." There she sat, under the unrelenting rain, water streaming down her face like tears she refused to shed. The photograph in her hand grew soggy, its edges curling, but her expression remained a paradox. Pain etched deep, yet underscored by an unyielding strength. She was a figure out of tragedy, a heroine cast down yet unbroken, her silence a louder rebuke than any cry. Marcus retreated inside, his chest swelling with triumph, believing he had purged his kingdom of an intruder. He did not hear the whispers of the tempest gathering force, nor did he see the threads of destiny weaving a net to ensnare his hubris. Time crept forward, an hour slipping by in the quiet arrogance of the hotel's walls. Then the telephone pierced the stillness, its ring a harbinger of upheaval. Marcus answered, his tone dripping with self-assurance. "This is Henry Grayson," came the voice on the line, deep and commanding, a rumble of authority that shook the air. "Owner of the Serenity chain. I've been informed you expelled a guest tonight." Marcus grinned, unshaken. "Yes, sir. A ragged woman, unfit for our standards. I was protecting the hotel's reputation." The silence that followed was a blade poised to strike, and when Henry spoke again, his words were ice and fury. "That woman was Grace Monroe, our largest shareholder, holding 40% of Serenity's stock. She came to test how you treat those who walk through her doors. You failed, Reed, and failed spectacularly." The phone slipped from Marcus's hand, clattering to the desk with a sound like a death knell. His face drained of color, his legs trembling as the weight of his error crashed upon him. At that moment, the lobby doors swung open once more, and Grace Monroe re-entered, not as the broken figure he had cast out, but as a sovereign reclaiming her realm. The drenched coat was gone, replaced by a sleek black suit that hugged her form with elegance, her hair swept into a high bun, her presence radiating a quiet power that silenced the room. James stood at her side, his broad shoulders squared, a faint smile playing on his lips as he witnessed the turning of the tide. Grace advanced toward Marcus, her steps measured, her voice a melody of steel and grace. "You saw me through the lens of my skin and the tatters I wore," she said, each word a chisel against his pride. "But you failed to see my worth. I'm not here to ruin you, Marcus. I'm here to show you what you've refused to see." He stammered, his apologies a jumble of panic, but she raised a hand, her gaze drifting to a distant memory. Her voice softened, yet carried the weight of decades. She spoke of her mother, a black janitor who, 30 years prior, had been driven from this very hotel, clutching a young Grace's hand as rain mingled with her tears. She was turned away, Grace said, her throat tightening, not for lack of money, but for the color of her skin, for the weariness in her eyes. She wept that night, not just from the cold, but from the shame of being less than human in their eyes. I vowed then, no more tears. I clawed my way up, turned their rejection into my empire, and now I stand where they once stood to ensure no one else is cast out as she was. Marcus bowed his head, the fortress of his arrogance crumbling into dust. But the story did not end there. A sudden tremor shook the air as James stepped forward, his voice quivering with a courage long suppressed. "I knew your mother," he said, his eyes locking with Grace's. "She gave me bread once, right out there, when I was a boy starving under this same rain. I never forgot her face or her kindness." Grace's lips parted in surprise, then curved into a smile as radiant as dawn breaking through storm clouds. She placed a hand on James's shoulder, a bridge forged across time. "Then we both owe her something," she said, her voice a hymn of gratitude. The lobby fell silent, the opulence dimming before the raw humanity of that moment. Marcus felt small, not from the threat of power or wealth, but from the vastness of his own blindness. Grace turned to him, her tone gentling yet firm. I'm giving you a chance, Marcus, not because you deserve it, but because I believe mercy can mend what prejudice has broken. Days turned to weeks, and the Grand Serenity transformed. Its marble halls, once a bastion of exclusion, echoed with new purpose. One evening, under the same chandeliers, Marcus stood before a gathering of staff, his voice stripped of its former swagger, replaced by a humility born of revelation. "I thought I knew who belonged here," he said, his eyes finding Grace in the crowd, her presence a quiet anchor. "I was wrong. Wrong about her, wrong about so much. She gave me a chance to learn, to see beyond the surface, and I won't squander it." The room stirred with murmurs of respect, and as the session ended, Grace approached him. They clasped hands, not as victor and vanquished, but as two souls tethered by a shared reckoning. James joined them, clapping Marcus on the back, his grin a silent pact of camaraderie. Outside, the rain had ceased, the clouds parting to reveal a sky ablaze with stars, a canvas of hope painted anew. But the tale took one final twist. Late that night, as Grace prepared to leave, Marcus found her in the lobby, holding the broken silver bracelet from her spilled bag. "This was hers, wasn't it?" he asked, his voice tentative. Grace nodded, her fingers brushing the relic. "My mother's. She wore it every day, until the night they threw her out. It broke when she fell like I did." Marcus hesitated, then pressed it into her hand. "Let me fix it," he said. "Not just this, but everything I got wrong." Grace studied him, then nodded, a silent covenant sealed. Weeks later, the bracelet returned to her, whole and gleaming, a symbol of restoration. The Grand Serenity stood not merely as a hotel, but as a testament, a place where the echoes of prejudice were drowned by the song of mercy. Marcus Reed, once a gatekeeper of exclusion, became a student of humanity, his eyes opened by a woman he had once scorned. Grace Monroe, a shadow turned sovereign, walked away not with vengeance, but with the quiet triumph of a legacy redeemed. And in the stillness, the stars above whispered a truth eternal. From the ashes of judgment, compassion could rise, radiant and unbroken.